Bioterrorism is defined as the use of microorganisms or infected samples to cause terror and panic throughout populations. Now that we have the definition out of the way, we will now go into a little detail on the history of bioterrorism, looking at some instances where biological weapons were used. Amazingly, the use of biological weapons dates all the way back to 14th century BC, when diseased rams were sent to rival countries in attempts to weaken the enemy. When these rams were consumed by the enemy, the biological agents used would take their effect on those who had consumed the ram, leading to chronic disease and ultimately death if not treated. Now we go to 4th century BC, when archery was a prevalent weapon used during combat. The most notable documented example was how Scythian archers would infect their arrows by dipping them in a mixture of decomposing cadavers amongst other known microbial agents. This would cause deadly bacteria to be transferred to the tip of the arrows, creating an even more deadly weapon. When these arrows would penetrate the skin of their targets, many different diseases were passed on to the victim, thus causing much more harm than just a regular arrow. The overall success of biological warfare garnered much attention, and many different armies took advantage of microbial species during numerous future wars. The modern era of bioterrorism is said to have started towards the end of the 19th century, which happened to be around the same time as the start of the foundation of microbiology. Perhaps the most notable example of biological warfare can be traced back to the Germans during World War I. This was most commonly done by infecting animals' food and allowing the animals to be the bioterrorist agents' means of transportation. After World War I, the fear of bioterrorism was at an all-time high. This led to the ratification of the Geneva Protocol for the prohibition of the use in war of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases, and of bacteriological methods of warfare. This protocol prohibited the use of biological weapons during warfare. Throughout history, many different biological agents have been utilized, but the most common agent throughout time has been the smallpox virus. The spread of smallpox has been traced back from the earliest of epidemics. During the 6th century, increased trade with China and Korea introduces smallpox into Japan. During the 7th century, Arab expansion spread smallpox into northern Africa, Spain, and Portugal. During the 11th century, crusades further spread smallpox into Europe. Now in the 15th century, Portuguese occupation introduces smallpox into part of Western Africa. European colonization and the African slave trade imported smallpox into the Caribbean and Central and South America during the 16th century. European colonization imported smallpox into North America in the 17th century, and in the 18th century, exploration by Great Britain introduced smallpox into Australia. The aftermath of the spreading of the smallpox virus led to an astounding 300 million deaths throughout the world, easily making smallpox the deadliest agent used in biological warfare history. Bacillus anthracis, commonly called anthrax, has also been used multiple times in attempts of bioterrorism. Anthrax works by targeting its victims by way of 3 forms. The disease targets victims through the skin's epithelial cells, inhalation of spores, and lastly, consuming of spores. Of these 3 methods, inhaled anthrax was the deadliest, with a mortality rate of about 75%, followed by consumed spores and then skin-targeting spores. Once the strain of anthrax has been broken down inside the new host, it is not the bacteria itself that causes the iniquities, but the individual toxins that the bacteria produce. These toxins, lethal toxin and edema toxin, attack a certain bodily protein called CMG2. Once this protein is targeted, if not treated in time, this disease can ultimately lead to death.